Hi, welcome back to the workshop. Oh dear, now these fuel pipes really don't look in great nick. And I'm trying to get my mate John's Range Rover through an MOT, and for that I need to get it started. And although I've now got a really nice list of things I've got to do, I haven't really made a ton of progress. I have established that a lot of fuel is leaking out of those fuel pipes, and I have covered the floor of my workshop in petrol, and I still don't really know where that fuel is coming from. So my cunning plan is I've actually got myself a pond liner from a fish shop. I've actually connected up the fuel pump to a switch so I can have a bit better control over turning it on and off. And the idea is that if I actually then push the fuel through the lines, I'll then actually see exactly where the leak is, and then I can work out whether I can repair it, or whether I have to replace all the fuel lines. Now I've placed the container right here because I think the fuel was mostly dripping from this area, but I'll wear some protective glasses just in case. I've got my little button here. So when I push this, the fuel pump should pump the fuel through the system, and it should just leak here, and I should be able to tell exactly where it's coming from. So here goes. So you can hear it pumping. The fuel pump's running. Oh my word, hang on. Well, I was nearly there. I mean, you know, really, yes, I can actually see it really is coming out at some pace. So it's literally just on the back, on the top there. So that's kind of good news in a way, because it means that potentially that bit could be fixed. But to be honest, it does look rather rusty all the way along. Okay, so it looks like the fuel is definitely leaking from just above the chassis rail, obviously where the fuel lines sit. And the reason I thought it might have been coming lower down, I guess before, it was obviously chucking out enough fuel that it actually ran all the way down the chassis rail into this area. So I guess I've caught it a little bit earlier this time, which is nice. So rather than just chucking more fuel over the workshop and onto the floor again, another way I could actually check exactly where that gap is with an airline. Yep, definitely missed. Right, so I got rid of the fuel pump and the fuel reservoir and everything, so now I can focus on using the air to find the leak. So I've got my brand new freshly plumbed in airline. I've got an air gun, just connect those together. So now I've got my compressed air. I've also got a socket extension here. I'm just going to pop that into the return line, like so. So pop that in there, and that's going to stop the air flowing out there, so it's going to come out of the hole. And then into my flow, I'm just going to put in the gun, so connect that up. So now when I blow on this, air is going to go through the fuel line and come out through the hole, and I'm hoping I'll be able to find more accurately exactly where that hole is. But of course, because there's fuel probably still in the system, I'll pop the glasses on again. So here we go. I can see the cobwebs moving, so it looks like we're coming from about here. Quite a jet. Now it's difficult to tell which fuel line it's coming out of. Basically, I've got the two fuel lines sit next to each other on top of the chassis rail, and so it feels like the outside one is actually sort of blowing the fuel, or the hole is blowing over this way. It could be that the inside one is blowing against that and bouncing back. Let's see if I can. But essentially, I think what's happened, going by the mud and stuff, it's obviously the mud is just sat on top of the fuel lines. They're made out of steel. Over those last 10, 12 years, of course, that moisture just rotted the steel. And of course, when I then try to force a load of fuel through it at high pressure, that just burst through the rust. I guess it was kind of inevitable. And obviously, we've seen the state of them. It looks like they could be like that all the way through. But I think, oh, a bit of fuel up there as well, as I thought. so what I need to do now is actually try and, well, just sort of lever them off the chassis rail, get them off the clips, and see if I can actually get a closer look at the fuel line. Perhaps I'm going to have to be able to repair it, but maybe I'm going to have to replace it. That's all right. Sorry. this is a little bit, oh, there we go. So now, so the fuel lines actually come away with the clip itself. That's free, but I can see there's something grabbing it just here. Okay, that's got it off. There we go. Oh look, and there we go. That is where the hole is. So, I mean, I might be able to repair that, but it is quite rusty. So I'll keep going and just see how many other holes we find. Now that is really stupid. Basically, when they put this vehicle together, they've attached the fuel lines to the chassis. Makes a load of sense. It's got clips all the way along. That's nice and tidy. But then they've attached some wiring to the bodywork, and then they've bolted the two together. But the really genius bit is they've actually got a clip for the wiring and a clip for the fuel line literally directly above each other. So when the body's being put together, it's actually pinned the two together. So I don't think I'm actually going to get these apart without doing some kind of damage. And I could obviously sacrifice the fuel line. We know that's in pretty ropey condition and got a big hole in it. So I could do that and just thread it out that way. But then I'll have to then thread the new fuel line through that if I'm going to use that same clip. What I might do is just leave it a little bit longer, just carry on down the line, see if I can actually unclip the rest of the fuel line. And if that's the only thing that's holding me up, then I'll deal with that. But I suspect I've got some more trouble ahead. It gets better. There's some more stupid here. So again, we've got our clips holding our fuel lines to the chassis, and there's this little kind of, I'm not really sure what it is. There's like a little section of steel which is just there. I don't know whether it makes it stronger or something, where the fuel lines are supposed to go through it. It's just on the body actually. I can get it out of the clip here, but there's this sort of strange little bit of bodywork here. It doesn't seem to do anything. There's nothing actually inside it. And obviously the fuel lines aren't supposed to go through. There may be some wiring went through there, but basically that is stopping these coming off that clip and then coming out of here. And it gets even tighter just up there, so that's not looking good. I'll carry on just in case and see if there's anything else in the way. Okay, so I've managed to sort of release the fuel lines all the way along. And then I can see where they can kind of kick up into the engine bay where they connect to the rest of the fuel system, and they go through this sort of heat shield fabric. Now obviously I can disconnect it from the engine easily enough, but the tricky thing is it's still pinched, if you like, or they're both still pinched, both sort of here and also further down the vehicle. Now because they're so perished and need to be replaced, it's not so bad if I actually cut them off to get them off the vehicle. It's just going to mean that to try and get the new ones back in position, it's going to be quite tricky. And I think I'll worry about that later, but it's now time for a bit of cutting, I think. Right, so I'm through those two pipes at this end, so now those two pipes can actually be removed through the top of the engine bay, and the other end of it can go out this way through the back of the chassis. I now need to cut a similar thing at the other end of the other pinch point, and then I can then remove most of the fuel pipes from the middle of the vehicle and then the last bits from the rear. Right, so that is now cut, so I should be able to pull it through. There we go, there's one. And then, this is the one that's pinched. It's going to take a bit more persuasion. Maybe a lot more persuasion. There's that end. Right, so now finally the centre part. So what I'm hoping is I can maybe tease them out one at a time. There we go. I'll try not to damage the clips, but I think they're going to get a little bit broken on the way. going to be really fun doing this in reverse to get the new fuel lines in, but hey, worry about that some other time. Right, so last bit is in the engine bay. Right, so the bit I now need to get to are these two fuel lines here. You can see on the top half of the engine here, they're actually rubber, and then there's one joint there which is sort of crimped in position, and the other one is a Jubilee clip. So I'm just going to put a little bit of penetrating fluid on there. And that way I have a fighting chance of getting them off. I don't want to damage anything on the engine itself. And then of course the steel bit I've just cut is on the other end of that hose. All right, well, thanks for that. Cheers then, thanks. Right then, so our fuel lines are now in far more parts than when they were attached to the vehicle, but I did at least find the two holes where the fuel was really gushing out of, but clearly they're in really bad nick. They need to be replaced. The only thing is I've just found out that these parts are now obsolete. Now I did find one fuel line available somewhere, but I'm not sure which side it was or which part it was. So really I think the best thing to do is to make my own from scratch. And that might actually help when it comes to trying to thread everything back through those two pinch points on the chassis of our Range Rover. But that is going to be a job for another day. I think now I deserve a cup of tea. Now, first of all, thanks for all your questions and comments. Do keep them coming. It's a brilliant way to while away the time while having a cup of tea. Now, I've got one here, question from Andy Nelson in Minnesota. Now, he's got a 2007 VW Rabbit, or as we know it, a Golf Mark V. Now, he loves doing a few DIY jobs on his car, and he now desperately needs to do some suspension work. And his question is, what is the safest way to levitate the front of the car sufficiently to gain access to the suspension parts without a lift, as seen in our shows or professional garages? It's a very good question. I mean, let's face it, once you've got a full-size lift, you're never going to go back. But I started back in the day with just a single trolley jack and a couple of axle stands. Now, these guys are super important. Never try to work under a raised car without axle stands, or at least something very, very substantial that's going to stop it from falling on top of you. Now, beyond a standard trolley jack, you can get a more modern version using airbags, but then of course you're going to need a compressor and an air supply of some sort. Now, if you're feeling a little bit more extravagant, you could always go for some portable lifts. Now, they come in all kinds of shapes and sizes and price points, but essentially end up with something a bit like a scissor lift, if you like, that goes underneath the vehicle. And once you've got a pair of those, you're going to end up with a load more friends to help you, which is always very handy. Now, however you lift your car, again, can't be stressed enough, always use axle stands. And these things are so inexpensive these days. You can get them from all kinds of places. If you're in America, it's going to be O'Reilly's and AutoZone. In Scandinavia, Biltema, obviously. Basically, get some of those, and also maybe get yourself a friend to help with the jobs, because it makes the jobs more fun for one thing, and also if something really bad was to happen, well, at least there'll be somebody close by to inherit your tools. So I've got another question here. This one is from Edward Fletcher. It says, what's in UK petrol? I've never seen fuel cloudy like that. All right, fair enough. In my defence, I did say fresh-ish fuel when I was doing my fire experiment, but to be fair, I hadn't actually gone out and bought fresh petrol that day, so I did use something that was lying around, but was definitely more fresh than our stale fuel. But maybe we should do the experiment again. So I've gone out and bought some pump fresh fuel today, so we can actually see how much better this burns than the stale fuel. So same procedure as last time. I'm just going to pop a little bit of that in. Then you can see it is very, very, very clear. And this side, of course, not. I have a feeling that some of the contamination could have been diesel, could have been chip fat, could have been all kinds of things. But now, this is going to work a treat. I've got my fire extinguisher again, just in case. And as always, don't try this at home, because I'm doing it for you. Let's get our fire going. There we are. So same as last time, we'll just go in, keep it nice and even on both of them. I'm hoping the vapours will go bang, but not too bang. There we go. There you go, much brighter, a little bit quicker. Definitely worth using the good fresh stuff. And also, while we're here, wouldn't it be kind of interesting to see if we could actually race stale fuel versus fast, fresh fuel? Well, I'll try and do it diagonally, and I'll give it a bit of a go. I think we might start sort of in the middle, and then see how messy this is going to be. Quite messy. Even-ish. So whoever gets to the centre first wins. So I can already see that the fresh fuel is a little bit less viscous, so it's kind of interesting. So I need some really long arms for this. Now what's interesting is that our fresh petrol was kind of consumed more quickly than our stale fuel, but also you can see that all the contaminants in the stale fuel were perhaps why it burnt for longer and has left a really horrible sticky mess. Well, now we know. Now, since I've been putting up these videos, I've had a lot of comments from you expressing quite a bit of concern for the state of my lockdown hair, or as I like to call it, my hair. Now perhaps Poppy and Grace express it best.
Ed, we love your new television programme, but we prefer your old hairstyle.
Okay, let's see if we can do something about it. Right then, okay. Oh yeah. Yeah, you're right, that was a little bit unruly, so thank you for that. Brilliant. Much better. Right, we've had a few comments about the number of adverts during the show, and I do get it, it does rather mess with the zen of our time together. But while I'm still rummaging around finding some more excellent commercial partners for the show, I do need to keep the production pixies fed and watered. So that means we are going to have a few more ads for a little bit longer. But there is a way that you can help. Many of you have asked about whether I have a Patreon page, and that way you could actually get involved and support the show directly. Well, I've looked into it, it's clearly a brilliant idea, and so last night I actually set up the Workshop Diaries page. So if you do want to get involved, you do want to support the show, then check it out. And in the meantime, I'll do my best to try and tidy up those ads a bit. Oh yes, last week I was talking about subtitles, and so many of you have got in touch offering your help when it comes to translation, so thank you so much, it's very exciting. I still have to get the text files ready, so please bear with me, it will happen sometime very soon. But anyway, let's get back onto the show. So my electric ice cream van project is going very well. I've obviously taken the diesel engine out, I've chosen my electric motor, I got rid of all the other ancillaries and bits and pieces. I've 3D scanned the gearbox and the motor faces, so I know how they're going to connect together, and now I had to work out how the drive shafts are going to be connected. So my next bit was to explore how all the various components would kind of interact and how they could be put together. Now with our Sprinter gearbox on the bench, it's a good time to look at some of the engineering. Now on the inside of the bell housing you see these webs all the way around, but also these really lovely compound curves. They're almost like pillows or perhaps clouds. Now on the other side of that you can see is actually this very strong looking lattice, this diamond shape on both sides. Now all of these details are about trying to make the gearbox casing as strong as possible while at the same time using as little material as possible. And of course that's great for racing, for going fast, because less weight means more speed. Now because it is a modern gearbox, it's got a concentric slave cylinder for the clutch, and that pushes onto this release bearing there. Now when you use your foot to operate the clutch pedal, that in turn pushes hydraulic fluid into the system, into that concentric slave cylinder, which in turn pushes that release bearing onto the fingers of your clutch pressure plate. Now rather counterintuitively, that actually releases the pressure on the centre plate, which sits between that pressure plate and the flywheel. So when this is clamped tightly together, it directly connects the engine to the gearbox, the crankshaft to that first motion shaft. Of course that's what gives you drive. Now you can see in the centre of this you've got a little load of splines there. There's a load of splines on the first motion shaft. They should fit together nicely like so. So you can see that this surface here, this friction surface, is what's touching the flywheel's friction surface as well. And of course, when it's all clamped together, that friction is what transfers the drive. When you release the pressure by pushing the foot on the clutch, that allows you to feather the power from the engine into the gearbox, allows you to change gear, allows you to drive smoothly. So that really is a feature I'd like to retain, but really, a lot of the flywheel features I don't really need. Now the first, most obvious one is the ring gear. That's for starting the internal combustion engine. I don't have one of those, I have an electric motor, so that could go. Also, this flywheel is very, very heavy, and that's because it has a lot of mass which you need for inertia, and that inertia helps balance out the individual pulses from the individual cylinders. So again, I don't need that either. In fact, like with many racing cars, to make the engine spin up more quickly, you can actually lighten the flywheel. So that's exactly what I could do. Now the last feature that I don't really need is the fact that this is a dual mass flywheel, something that's fitted to many modern vehicles. Now, when you actually operate a clutch, when you engage it and disengage it, there could be a bit of snatching, a bit of judder. And the idea of a dual mass flywheel is to take some of that away. You've got a big mass here, big mass there, but they are actually connected. And they are supposed to move independently of each other. And the idea is that if you just go to the very edge of that movement, there's a bit more, but it's damped. And so what that does is actually take out all that judder and some of that unpleasantness, making the driving experience much smoother. Now, obviously, that's great if you're going to be changing gear a lot. With an electric motor, got a much broader torque curve, so that's not really a problem. Won't be changing gear that often anyway, but also it just overcomplicates things. I want to keep the surface for the clutch centre plate, I want to keep the bolt pattern perhaps, don't need the ring gear, don't need the mass, and certainly don't need the complication of the dual mass. And handily, I have a nice simple solution. Luckily for me, Mercedes have a tendency to keep engineering features on subsequent generations, which means that modern parts tend to fit on older vehicles and vice versa. Now, because I wanted a simpler flywheel, I went back in time a little bit and had a look at older versions, but I wanted to make sure that the centre plate was still the same diameter, 240mm, and that meant, of course, I'd be able to transfer the same amount of torque. As it happens, this is from a much older Sprinter, and pretty much everything is identical. So the spline in the centre of the centre plate is the same, the stud pattern that holds the pressure plate onto the flywheel is exactly the same, the spigot bearing, or the pilot bearing, that actually supports the first motion shaft on the gearbox, that's the same. In fact, it even looks like an identical part. So theoretically, when this is all up together, it should fit in our gearbox nicely. The only thing I don't know is the distance between the fingers on the pressure plate and the back of the spigot. That needs to be pretty much the same distance, otherwise it isn't all going to fit together. So the only way I can really test that quickly is by putting these back together, try the original one, and then try our older one if you like. And if they're both much the same, then I can use that. It's worth noting you've got to have your gearbox side obviously pointing towards the gearbox. And also need to align that centre plate using this clever little tool. Right, so I can now try both of these into the gearbox and have a look at the differences. Well, our new flywheel and clutch assembly does seem to fit quite well. What I want to just check is the distance between the fingers here and the bottom of the spigot bearing or pilot bearing. So I'm just going to get a nice big, very big penny washer and then some vernier gauge and then just pop that down like so. So we've got just over 82 mil. That's all right. Try it on our original assembly. I would say it's just over 84, so 2 millimeters out. Well, certainly our clutch slave cylinder there is going to easily be able to accommodate that, so I think we're good to go. So the only thing we need to worry about now is to get rid of that ring gear, so we've got a bit less metal to worry about. Right now, final thing before I can actually take this flywheel to the machine shop just to get a load of the meat removed is to remove this ring gear. That should be relatively easy. All I have to do is heat it up while spinning it slowly, and the idea is that eventually the ring gear is going to expand more quickly than the rest of the flywheel. It'll just drop off. Should be simple as that. Well, this may be just not as hot as oxyacetylene, so perhaps a little bit of gentle persuasion might help. And if that doesn't work, you go even hotter. Well, that doesn't seem to be working, so I think perhaps we're going to have to go back to the old-fashioned ways and cut it off. So with that, the flywheel is ready to go off to the machine shop. But that is a job for another day. See you next week.